Hi, this is Lucia Inman. In today's video, I would like to talk about Mark Hofmann and what I think is going on in terms of personality. Now, I am not a licensed professional, so I have no ability to diagnose somebody whatsoever. This is just my personal opinion. I could be completely wrong, and I'm just guessing on what could possibly be going on in this situation, but I'm not saying that I'm right. So what I'm gonna do in this video is I'm going to be listing Mark Hofmann's behaviors, and then I'm going to translate those onto the diagnostic criteria listed in the DSM and see where that falls into in terms of psychopathology. So Mark Hofmann ended up getting caught for forging documents, and he was very, very good at it. For example, the salamander letter. This letter changed the entire Mormon church. So it wasn't just some little thing that he was doing. Now, this is a form of conning behavior. So typically, people engage into this deceitful behavior to gain or maintain power. So if you think about it, changing the Mormons' philosophy and a lot of people's beliefs, that's something that would give him a lot of power, that would make him feel really powerful. And so he used this deceitful technique to accomplish that. Now, this behavior is seen in factor 1 psychopathy. It's also seen in antisocial personality disorder, and it's especially seen in Machiavellianism. When it comes to psychopathy, there's two types of psychopathy. There is factor 1 psychopathy or primary psychopathy, and factor 2 psychopathy, also known as sociopathy. Now, sociopathy is not a clinical term anymore. It used to be, but when it's used, it typically refers to factor 2 psychopathy. So you can see in the documentary how he actually fooled everybody. He fooled his wife, he fooled members of the church, just a lot of people, neighbors even. And so this shows that he most likely had some sort of superficial charm. So like this very nice facade, this front that he had, it was like an act, it wasn't real. So he knew exactly what he had to do to make people around him believe that he was a nice person so that he could get away with the crime life that he wanted to live. This is seen in factor 1 psychopathy. It's actually a trait in the DSM, superficial charm. When I think of superficial charm, I always think of this factor 1 psychopath. His name was Ronnie Alcala. He was a photographer and he would murder his victims. But at one point, back in the day, he was in the dating game, and it was this TV show where he would meet like with dates. So if you look up Rodney Alcala, the dating game, there are videos of it, and you can see what superficial charm might look like on a psychopath. Now, Hofmann's crimes escalated when he planted the 2 bombs and he murdered 2 people and injured 2 people. And then he tried to commit suicide, although I'm not so sure he was really trying to kill himself, because he didn't, and he was really, really smart. I feel like if he really wanted to kill himself, he would have. But I don't know, that's just my personal opinion. Now, in order for somebody to become a serial killer, he has to kill 3 or more people. So technically, he is not a serial killer. However, this qualifies as premeditated murder. So he took his time to make those bombs. He thought through it. He was very calculative, very cold. And I think that his flat affect and his low empathy made him capable of just real chill, make those bombs, deliver it. And so it was like a perfect plan and execution, because he didn't get nervous. He didn't have that sort of empathy or that level of neuroticism. So psychopaths and primary psychopaths especially have a very low level of what's called neuroticism. That means that they have really low anxiety, they have really low worry, they're not self-conscious. It's just like, it's perfect for the type of thing he was doing. So going back to this premeditated murder, is also a trait of primary psychopathy. However, a factor 2 psychopath or a secondary psychopath or sociopath would be a lot more impulsive, wouldn't be so cold, and wouldn't be so calculative to perform his crimes, which makes them get caught a lot faster than a primary psychopath. So when he attempted suicide, he did this so that he wouldn't get caught in his forging documents. This shows a disregard for safety, but also what he's trying to do here is trying to avoid responsibility, right? So he did all these bad things and he's just trying to get away with it. So avoiding responsibility is actually a trait of factor 2 psychopathy and antisocial personality. I suppose that you could also see it in factor 1 psychopathy, but I feel like it's not as prominent there. And avoiding responsibility, it's also seen in narcissistic personality disorder, which he had some traits of. So a typical way that psychopaths, so primary psychopaths or secondary psychopaths or narcissists, a typical method that they use to avoid responsibility, it's rationalization. So they make up a lot of excuses or reasons why they're doing what they're doing. In Hofmann's case, he said, toying with people's beliefs is a way to experiment and try to figure out why they believe what they do. So I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but the way he put it is so that he was curious about other people and he was trying to figure out other people, which would not be true because first of all, a psychopath doesn't really care about anyone else. So he's not gonna have much genuine curiosity for other people. But in his mind, he came up with this reason to like justify his actions, right? So try to come up with a reason that would make his actions right, even though they're not right, they're very wrong. Of course, forging and the entire front that he kept up with, it's a form of pathological lying. We see this also in primary psychopathy. We also see this in antisocial personality disorder and in narcissistic personality disorder. At one point in the documentary, he was explaining how when he was carrying the bomb upstairs into the building, right, he didn't feel so much guilt, but he actually wondered, like, what about if I'm wrong? Because the way he justified this action was like a way of survival, so like a way of protecting himself, right, against getting caught. And so because of that, in his mind, it made it right. But he said that when he was going upstairs, that he was thinking, what about if there is actually a God and then I'm gonna be judged, right? He was afraid of that. And which really shows you what their psychopathic mind is really like. So they're not gonna care about the suffering that they inflict, and their thought always goes back to themselves, like, how is everything affecting me? How are my actions affecting me? How is other people's suffering affecting me? How is the world affecting me? That's all they can think about. And this also happens with narcissistic personality disorder, with antisocial personality, and with factor 1 psychopathy, because they have such low empathy for anyone else. Even though they pretend and fool people, that does not mean it's real. I think it's important to understand that when somebody has a real low level of empathy, like in this case, it's not going to pick a person, say his wife, and then love her to death. Like, that just doesn't happen because they can't love anyone but themselves, right? And so just the fact that he maintained a marriage is impressive, but that he can fool everyone, it really shows his skills. Like, typically a primary psychopath is going to have shallow affect. That's actually in the criteria for primary psychopathy, and it just means that he doesn't really experience a lot of deep emotions like love. So it's unlikely that he would feel a whole lot for his family members or anyone really. But psychopaths sometimes are pretty successful at mimicking emotion and mimicking love and all those qualities that come naturally to people who are not psychopaths. Some people think, could it be that he just really loved his family but that he was doing all these terrible things? No, he didn't love anyone. People who have low empathy, they're users. So they view relationships in a commercial way, and I do not mean in a fair trade. I mean as how can this person benefit me? So in their mind, they think if I have a use for that person, then that person is welcome in my life. Like, for example, his wife, that was a perfect front. It was a perfect cover, right? To have a family and kids. And so that people would think that he was such a trusting, good man. He also appeared that he was complying with probably his church values. So it was a perfect environment for him to hide in. In fact, the wife explained later in the documentary how as soon as she signed the divorce papers, he shut her down and would never ever see her again. Like, he would not accept her visits in the jail. So, I mean, if you love somebody that much, I suppose you could behave like he did, but knowing that he's a psychopath, she wasn't useful to him anymore, so there's no reason for him to waste time with her anymore. This behavior is actually extremely prevalent in narcissistic personality as well as psychopathy, but with narcissism, a lot of times it comes through when a narcissist discards you, like they just no longer have a use for you. And so suddenly, like if you're in a relationship with somebody, they just be like, nope, I'm gonna do this other thing, so I don't want to be with you anymore. So feelings don't matter as much as how useful you are to the narcissistic person or to the psychopath. His wife also said that he would love to take people on expensive meals, and like he would love to buy real expensive stuff, like a really expensive car. At one point he even attempted to buy a $600,000 home back then. The deal fell through and he couldn't do it. So this translates as wanting to appear superior, right? Wanting to impress people. This is very narcissistic and extremely narcissistic behavior. We also see this wanting for power, wanting of status in somebody who is Machiavellian. His wife also said that after he had planted the bombs, I believe, that all the chaos that created, that he had created, and it was all over the news, that he would enjoy watching the news and that he seemed like really excited to watch the news. In the psychopathic mind, it's like proving to the world, I guess, that they're better than anyone else because look what they did, right? It's all over the news, and so it fulfills their sense of attention seeking, grandiosity. In fact, his craving for impressing people and for getting people's admiration, approval, which at its core, it's a narcissistic behavior. But this started when he was a child. One time he went into a scavenger hunt, I think it was like a treasure hunt, and the day before, the days prior or something, he planted a bag of coins in the area where they were going to be searching so that he would find the bag, and he did, and would impress all the friends. And it's like, okay, well, you already see this behavior since he's a child, this deceitful behavior, narcissistic, attention-seeking. So see how pervasive those things are. In fact, they got worse, right? It got worse as he became older. So psychopathy is characterized by thrill-seeking. This also happens with narcissism, but not as much. What made him excited at first, like his first crimes, probably weren't enough. And so he kept escalating in the way he would deceive people with these documents, right? Getting better and better. And that way he would feel satisfied, because what satisfied him at first, later on wouldn't cut it. And this happens a lot with primary psychopaths. It's like, well, if they steal and that gives them the thrill, stealing after a while doesn't work. They have to rape or murder or something like that. So it keeps escalating for them to get the same thrill. It's like a drug user or something like that. A typical narcissistic thought that we see in him is the idea that if something seems to be true, it becomes true. And this was his philosophy, right? He even explained that in the documentary. So because narcissists are so extremely dishonest to themselves, he fooled himself into believing that he was actually creating these real documents just because they looked real, right? It's like if I can fool people, then it makes it real and it gives me godlike qualities. Now, when you're a psychopath and when you're a narcissist, you have this craving for admiration, as we've discussed. And so because he couldn't really share his crimes with anyone, I feel like he was feeling a little disillusioned, like no one can appreciate how great I am. And so at one point he decided to share his crime with his wife and told her, hey, listen, this is a document that I made. I forged this. And then she got really mad at him. And then he said, it's not true. It's not fake. It's real. I was just wanting to know what you would say or something like that. So here he was desperate for admiration. But when he told his wife and he didn't get it, he got the opposite reaction. He was like, okay, they're not worth it. This is a typical narcissistic behavior to like do something to obtain admiration. If they don't obtain admiration, they'll just drop it. And that's it. That's the end of it. Now, obviously, he had a disregard for morality. This is seen in primary psychopathy and antisocial personality. And he also had no remorse. So a lack of remorse is also a characteristic of psychopathy, both types. Now, with all this said, I wondered, could he qualify for the dark triad traits? So the dark triad traits is when somebody has psychopathy, either kind, narcissism, so narcissistic personality, and Machiavellianism. His craving for power, manipulation, his lack of remorse makes him qualify perfectly for Machiavellianism, for psychopathy. His craving for admiration, his grandiosity, his materialistic mindset when he wanted all these expensive things makes him qualify for narcissism. So I really think he could very well have the dark triad traits. There is another construct called the dark tetrad, and that's psychopathy, narcissism, and Machiavellianism plus sadism. When I think of sadism, I think of John Wayne Gacy. That was a highly sadistic criminal. I don't see any sadism in Mark Hofmann. He just didn't care. So just a complete lack of empathy. And they can cause a lot of damage, but that does not make him a sadist. Lastly, I would like to do a Big Five analysis on him. This model was developed in the 1980s and it's been used ever since. So this doesn't have to do so much with psychopathology, but more about what his personality could be like. The Big Five traits are openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Now, each one of those traits has 6 facets. Openness to experience has imagination, aesthetic sensitivity, attentiveness to inner feelings, preference for variety, and intellectual curiosity. So I feel like he was really high in openness to experience. Typically, people who are really high on this trait tend to be really intelligent. Now, in order to create something like the salamander letter, you have to be high in fantasy. So I think his imagination or fantasy facet was pretty high, probably. He has to have some sort of aesthetic sensitivity to be able to create these detailed documents. And I definitely think that his intellectual curiosity would have been high because that goes hand in hand with intelligence. As far as his conscientiousness goes, I really think he is really high in all the facets. So the facets are competence, order, dutifulness, achievement, striving, self-discipline, deliberation. So in order for him to be so successful at the work that he did, I mean, he has to be very high in conscientiousness. As far as extroversion goes, I think he is mid to low extroversion. So the facets here are friendliness, gregariousness, assertiveness, excitement seeking, positive emotion, and warmth. When it comes to friendliness, I don't think he was real friendly, but I think he had a lot of superficial charm. As far as assertiveness goes, I think he had to have some level of assertiveness in order to convince people that these documents were real. And obviously he had a lot of excitement seeking. The next trait is agreeableness. I think he was a low in agreeableness. People with narcissism and psychopathy and Machiavellianism are typically low in this trait. So the facets are trust, probably very low in trust, right? That's why he didn't get caught, because he wouldn't share this with anyone in the first place. Then straightforwardness, altruism, compliance, modesty, tender-mindedness. I don't see any of that in him at all, to be honest. And as far as neuroticism goes, usually primary psychopaths and grandiose narcissists tend to have a very, very low level of neuroticism. Neuroticism is composed by anxiety, anger or hostility, depression, self-consciousness, impulsiveness, and vulnerability. I don't see any of that in him. So my conclusion for this video is that he possibly has the dark triad traits. I see Machiavellianism, primary psychopathy, and narcissism in him. Another question people might be wondering is, why was he so good at forging documents? Well, obviously he had pretty good hand skills and he was incredibly intelligent, but that's probably not enough. So I think that the fact that in his personality he was probably extremely high in conscientiousness made him so analytical and pay such close attention to detail that it contributed to this. But also the fact that he had no remorse would allow him to work on this with nothing getting in the way and making him feel bad or making him lose his cool and making a mistake, right? So because of the low empathy, because of the low neuroticism, because of his high conscientiousness, he was able to just perform so well. So those are my thoughts on Mark Hofmann. If you enjoyed this video, you're more than welcome to give it a like and subscribe, but you don't have to. And I hope to see you next time. Bye!